Taeho Kim stood in the cold morning air and looked at the strange planet around him. The sky was purple and two suns hung low on the horizon. He pulled his jacket closer to his body. This was Kepler 442b, far from his home on Earth. He was here to learn survival skills at the Galactic Survival Academy. The academy was famous across the galaxy. Students from many different worlds came here to learn how to survive in dangerous places. Taeho was the only human in his class. The other students looked very different from him. "Line up, students," shouted Instructor Veltar. The instructor was tall and made of blue crystal. His body reflected light in all directions. When he spoke, his voice sounded like breaking glass. "Today you get your final assignment." Taeho stood next to his classmates. There was Mira Choi, who looked like a human but had gills on her neck and skin that changed color. She came from a water world where her people could store food and special organs inside their bodies. Next to her was Jae-sung Park, who was hard to see clearly. His body was made of gas and energy. He could float in the air and feed directly from sunlight. At the end of the line stood Da-eun Lee. She looked like she was made of living rock. Her skin was gray and hard like stone. Her people could sleep for years without food when times were hard. They just turned their bodies off like machines. "This planet has very long winters," Instructor Veltar continued. His crystal body flashed red with anger. "The winter here lasts 400 days. The temperature drops to -60 degrees. No plants grow. No animals move. Most beings die." Taeho listened carefully. He had read about this planet before coming here. The winters were famous for being deadly. "You must survive the winter using only basic tools," the instructor said. "No technology. No help from outside. Each of you will get a small shelter and simple tools. You must use your natural abilities to live." Mira smiled. Her skin turned bright green, which meant she was happy. "I can store enough nutrients in my body to last 6 months," she said proudly. Jae-sung flickered with golden light. "I only need sunlight. Even weak winter sun will keep me alive." Da-eun's stone face did not change expression. "My people can sleep through any winter. I will simply turn off my body until spring comes." Instructor Veltar looked at each student. When his crystal eyes reached Taeho, they flashed red again. "And what about you, human? Your species has no special abilities. You cannot store food in your body. You cannot eat sunlight. You cannot sleep for months. Humans are weak organics. You will probably need rescue before winter ends." The other students laughed. Taeho felt his face get hot, but he said nothing. He had heard this before. Humans were considered one of the weakest species in the galaxy. They had no claws, no armor, no special powers. They were just soft flesh and bone. "Follow me," Instructor Veltar said. He led them across the rocky ground to a valley. "This is where you will live. Each student gets 1 square kilometer of land." The valley was big and mostly empty. There were some trees near a small river. Rocky hills rose on both sides. The ground was covered with brown grass that moved in the cold wind. "Your shelters are already built," the instructor said. He pointed to 5 small buildings scattered across the valley. They looked like tiny houses made of metal and plastic. "Inside each shelter you will find basic tools. A knife, an axe, rope, and some containers. Nothing else." Taeho walked to his assigned shelter. It was at the far end of the valley, away from the others. The building was small, just big enough for one person to sleep and store things. Inside, he found the tools the instructor had mentioned. The knife was sharp but simple. The axe was heavy. The rope was strong. He walked outside and looked around his area. The other students were already starting their preparations. Mira was near the river using her hands to catch fish. Her body was already changing, storing the nutrients from the fish in special organs. Jae-sung floated high in the air, spreading his gaseous body to catch as much sunlight as possible. Da-eun was looking for the perfect cave where she could sleep safely. Taeho ignored them. He walked slowly across his land, looking at everything carefully. He knelt down and picked up handfuls of dirt, feeling the texture between his fingers. He found the river and tasted the water. It was clean and cold. He looked at the trees and saw they bore nuts and fruits. Near his shelter, he found animal tracks in the mud. Small deer-like creatures lived in this valley. He also saw signs of rabbit-like animals and some larger beasts. Birds flew overhead, getting ready to migrate to warmer places. The wind was getting colder. Taeho could feel winter coming. On Earth, his grandmother had taught him about the old ways. Before modern technology, humans had survived terrible winters by working hard and planning ahead. They had learned to preserve food and store it safely. "What are you doing, human?" called Mira from the river. Her skin was now dark blue, which meant she was curious. "The other students are already preparing. You were just walking around." "I am learning," Taeho said simply. Jae-sung floated down from the sky. His gaseous body sparkled with stored energy. "Learning what?" "There is nothing to learn. Use your natural abilities or die. That is how survival works." "Humans have no natural abilities," Dayun said in her slow, rocky voice. "That is why they are weak." Taeho did not argue with them. He continued walking around his land. He found a spot where the ground was soft but well drained. Water would not collect here during storms. The soil was dark and rich. This was a good place to dig. That evening, all the students gathered for their last meal together. The academy provided hot food and warm drinks. Tomorrow, they would be on their own. Instructor Veltar stood before them. "You have one night to rest. Tomorrow the test begins. Remember, you must survive 400 days of winter. Use your natural gifts. The strong will live. The weak will call for rescue." He looked directly at Taeho. "Human, are you sure you want to try this? Your species is not built for survival. There is no shame in admitting weakness." Taeho met the instructor's crystal gaze. "I will not need rescue," he said quietly. The other students laughed again. Even Mira, who had been kind to him, shook her head sadly. "Humans always think they are stronger than they are," she said. "It is a weakness of your species." That night, Taeho lay in his small shelter and thought about home. He remembered his grandfather telling stories about the Korean War, when his family had survived terrible winters with very little food. His grandmother had shown him how she made kimchi and preserved vegetables for winter. His father had taught him to hunt and fish. Humans might not have special organs or magical powers, but they had something else. They had knowledge passed down through generations. They had the ability to learn and adapt. They had stubbornness that kept them going when others gave up. Outside his shelter, the wind grew stronger. The temperature was dropping fast. Winter was coming early this year. Taeho could hear the other students in their shelters, confident in their natural abilities. He was not worried. Tomorrow he would begin his real work. While the others relied on their bodies, he would rely on his mind. He would show them what humans could do when they refused to give up. The first snow began to fall as Taeho closed his eyes. By morning, the ground would be white. The test would begin, and Taeho Kim would prove that sometimes the weakest-looking creature could be the strongest of all. Snow covered the valley when Taeho woke up. The white blanket was already ankle-deep and still falling. Through his small window, he could see his classmates starting their survival preparations. Mira was by the river, her skin now a deep purple color. She had been eating constantly since dawn, storing nutrients in the special organs throughout her body. Her stomach looked swollen and her arms were thicker than yesterday. She could store enough food to last months without eating again. Jae-sung floated above the valley, his gaseous body spread wide to catch the weak sunlight that filtered through the clouds. Even on cloudy days, his species could absorb enough energy to survive. He glowed softly as he fed. Dayun had found a cave in the rocky hills. She was carrying rocks to block the entrance, preparing for her long winter sleep. Once she sealed herself inside, she would not wake up until spring. Her body would slow down so much that she would barely be alive. Taeho put on his warmest clothes and stepped outside. The cold bit at his face immediately. His breath came out in white clouds. This was going to be a harsh winter, even worse than the instructor had warned. He walked to the spot he had chosen yesterday. The snow was deeper here because the wind had blown it into drifts. He brushed the snow away with his hands until he found the dark soil underneath. Then he picked up his axe and began to dig. The work was hard. The ground was starting to freeze, making it difficult to break. Each swing of the axe sent vibrations up his arms. Soon his hands were numb with cold and his back ached. But Taeho did not stop. He had a plan. While the other students relied on their natural abilities, Taeho would use human knowledge. His grandmother had taught him about root cellars, underground rooms where people stored food before refrigerators were invented. His grandfather had shown him how to preserve meat without electricity. These were old human techniques that had kept his people alive for thousands of years. By midday, Taeho had dug a hole 3 feet deep and 6 feet across. His hands were bleeding through his gloves and sweat froze on his face as soon as it appeared. But the hole was taking shape. "What is that human doing?" he heard Jae-sung ask. The gaseous being had floated closer to watch. Mira waddled over, her body heavy with stored nutrients. He is digging a hole. I do not understand why. Humans do strange things when they panic, Dawen said from her cave entrance. He probably thinks he can hide underground like a small animal. They watched for a while, then lost interest. Mira went back to the river to catch more fish. Jae-sung returned to his energy absorption. Daeun continued preparing her cave. Taeho ignored them and kept digging. As the hole got deeper, he had to be more careful. He used his knife to cut precise edges and his hands to remove loose dirt. The walls had to be straight and strong, or they would collapse when the ground froze completely. That evening, Instructor Veltar came to check on the students. He found Mira sitting by the river, her body now twice its normal size. She looked uncomfortable but satisfied. Excellent work, the instructor said. His crystal body flashed blue with approval. You have stored enough nutrients for the entire winter. He visited Jae-sung next, who was resting near his shelter after a day of energy absorption. Good. Your species' ability to feed on starlight will serve you well. At Daeun's cave, the instructor nodded approvingly. Your hibernation chamber is well prepared. You will sleep safely through the worst of the winter. Finally, he came to Taeho's area. The human was still digging, working by the light of a small fire. The hole was now 6 feet deep and perfectly square. Neat piles of dirt surrounded the excavation. What is this? Instructor Veltar asked. His voice carried confusion and annoyance. Taeho climbed out of the hole, dirt covering his clothes. It is a cellar, he said simply. A what? An underground storage room. I will keep food here during the winter. The instructor's crystal body flashed red. You are wasting time and energy. You should be gathering food to eat now before it gets too cold. Instead, you are digging useless holes. The food I gather will spoil if I do not store it properly, Taeho explained. This cellar will keep it fresh all winter. Impossible. Food rots without preservation technology. You have no special organs to store nutrients like Mira. You cannot photosynthesize like Jae-sung. You cannot hibernate like Daeun. You are just a weak organic with no survival adaptations. Taeho looked up at the instructor. My people survived on planets with harsh winters long before we had technology. We learned to preserve food using natural methods. Instructor Veltar made a sound like breaking glass, which was how his species laughed. Your people barely made it off their home planet. Humans are the weakest species in the galaxy. This digging will only make you tired and cold. You will call for rescue within 10 days. The instructor left, shaking his crystal head. Taeho watched him go, then climbed back into his hole and continued digging. Over the next 3 days, the snow fell heavier. The temperature dropped so low that even Mira had trouble moving. Her stored nutrients were keeping her alive, but the cold was making her sluggish. Jae-sung found that the thick clouds blocked most of the sunlight he needed. He was still glowing, but more dimly than before. Daeun had sealed herself in her cave. She would not come out until spring. Taeho finished digging his cellar. It was 8 feet deep, 10 feet long, and 8 feet wide. The walls were straight and smooth. He had dug drainage channels to keep water from collecting at the bottom. Now came the hard part, building the roof. Using fallen branches and his rope, he constructed a wooden frame over the hole. He covered this with smaller branches, then with layers of grass and dirt. Finally, he packed snow on top for insulation. When he was finished, the cellar was completely hidden underground except for a small wooden door. Inside the cellar, the temperature was much warmer than outside. The earth protected it from the wind and cold. Taeho had created different sections for different types of food storage. One area was very dry for storing grain and nuts. Another was slightly damp for vegetables. A third section would be for preserved meat. Now he needed to fill it with food. Taeho spent the next week hunting and gathering. He used his knife to make snares for the rabbit-like creatures. He carved a spear for hunting the larger deer-like animals. He gathered nuts and fruits from the trees before they froze. He caught fish from the river before it iced over completely, but simply storing fresh food would not work. Without preservation, it would rot within days. Taeho needed to use the old methods his family had taught him. He built a smoking chamber next to his shelter using rocks and clay from the riverbank. Inside this chamber, he hung strips of meat over a small, smoky fire. The smoke and heat would preserve the meat for months. He had learned this technique from his grandfather, who had learned it from his grandfather. For vegetables, Taeho used fermentation. He packed cabbage-like plants in containers with salt water, just like his grandmother made kimchi. The fermentation process would preserve the vegetables and make them more nutritious. He dried fish by hanging them in the cold, dry air. He made pemmican by mixing dried meat with animal fat and berries. He stored nuts and seeds in waterproof containers. Every day the cellar filled with more preserved food. Tejo worked from dawn to dark, preparing for the long winter ahead. His hands were raw and cracked from the cold. His body ached constantly, but he did not stop. Mira watched him sometimes from her shelter. She looked worried. Her stored nutrients were lasting well, but she could not move much in the cold. The human works too hard, she told Jae-sung. He will exhaust himself before winter really begins. Jae-sung glowed weakly in the cloudy sky. Let him waste his energy. When he collapses, the instructors will rescue him. Then we will not have to listen to him anymore. But as the days passed and the cold grew worse, something strange happened. While the other students grew weaker, Tejo seemed to get stronger. His preserved food gave him steady nutrition. His underground cellar protected his supplies from the freezing weather. His daily work kept his body warm and healthy. 10 days after the test began, Instructor Veltar returned to check on the students. He found Mira huddled in her shelter, moving very little to conserve her stored energy. Jae-sung was barely glowing, struggling to find enough light through the heavy clouds. Da-eun's cave was silent and sealed, but at Taiho's shelter, the instructor found something unexpected. The human was cooking a hot meal over a warm fire. The smell of cooked meat and vegetables filled the air. Tejo looked healthy and strong, not weak and desperate. How? Instructor Veltar demanded. His crystal body flashed with confusion. Tejo smiled and gestured toward his hidden cellar. Would you like to see? Instructor Veltar followed Tejo through the snow to where the cellar was hidden. From the surface, it looked like just another hill covered in white. The instructor would never have known there was anything underneath if Tejo had not shown him. Tejo brushed snow away from a wooden door built into the ground. He lifted it up, revealing stairs that led down into darkness. Warm air flowed out of the opening, carrying rich smells of preserved food. Come down, Tejo said, climbing into the cellar. But watch your head. The ceiling is low. The instructor followed, his crystal body providing light in the underground space. What he saw made him flash bright yellow with surprise. The cellar was organized like a small warehouse. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with containers of different sizes. Strips of dried meat hung from the ceiling. Nets full of nuts and dried fruits were suspended in corners. The air smelled of smoke, salt, and fermentation. This is impossible, Instructor Veltar said. You built all this in just 2 weeks? The digging took longest, Tejo explained. But my people have been building root cellars for thousands of years. This design has worked through many hard winters. Tejo showed the instructor around his underground storage room. In one section, he had containers filled with fermented vegetables. The sour smell reminded him of his grandmother's kimchi. In another area, smoked fish hung in neat rows. Large clay pots held rendered animal fat mixed with dried berries and meat. The temperature down here stays just above freezing, Tejo said. Cold enough to preserve food, but not cold enough to freeze it solid. The earth insulates everything from the outside weather. Instructor Veltar examined the preserved foods. The fermented vegetables still looked fresh and nutritious. The smoked meat was dry but not rotten. The containers were all sealed carefully to keep out moisture and pests. How long will this last? The instructor asked. If I am careful with portions, it should feed me for the entire winter, Tejo said. Maybe longer. They climbed back up to the surface. The wind was howling now, and snow was falling so hard they could barely see across the valley. The temperature had dropped even more since morning. The other students, Instructor Veltar said. How are they surviving this cold? Tejo looked toward their shelters. Mira's having trouble. Her stored nutrients keep her alive, but she cannot generate enough heat to stay warm. Jae-sung is getting weaker because the clouds block most of the sunlight. Daohyun should be fine in her cave, but she cannot wake up if something goes wrong. As if summoned by their conversation, a weak voice called through the storm. Help, please help. It was Mira. Her voice came from the direction of her shelter, barely audible over the wind. Tejo and the instructor hurried through the deep snow. They found Mira collapsed outside her shelter door. Her skin had turned a pale gray color and she was shivering violently. Her body was still swollen with stored nutrients, but she was clearly in trouble. I cannot get warm, she gasped. My people need water to regulate body temperature. But the river is frozen. I am too cold to break the ice. Instructor Veltar looked at her with concern. Your species stores nutrients, but not heat. You still need external warmth to survive. I did not think it would get this cold so fast, Mira said. Her teeth were chattering. The weather report said winter would come gradually. Weather on this planet is unpredictable, the instructor admitted. Sometimes winter arrives weeks early. Tejo knelt beside Mira. Come with me. I have a warm fire and hot food. I cannot eat, Mira said weakly. My storage organs are full. Adding more food would make me sick. You do not need to eat. You need to get warm. Tejo helped Mira to her feet. She leaned heavily on him as they walked through the snow to his shelter. Inside, he had a fire burning in a stone fireplace he had built. The shelter was warm and comfortable. Mira collapsed near the fire, holding her hands toward the flames. Slowly, color returned to her skin. The violent shivering stopped. Thank you, she whispered. I thought I was going to die. Instructor Veltar watched this with great interest. Human, your shelter is much warmer than the standard buildings we provided. I improved it, Tejo said. I added insulation using grass and mud. I built a better fireplace with a chimney to draw smoke out but keep heat in. I sealed all the gaps where cold air could enter. The instructor examined the shelter more closely. Tejo had indeed made many changes. The walls were thicker now, packed with natural insulation. The door fit tightly in its frame. The windows were covered with animal skins that let in light but blocked wind. These modifications require significant knowledge of construction and thermodynamics, the instructor said. My father is an engineer, Tejo explained. He taught me about heat loss and insulation, but these techniques are very old on my world. Humans learned to build warm shelters long before we understood the science behind them. A new sound reached them through the storm. A weak, pulsing light. Jae-sung was calling for help in the way his species communicated. They found him collapsed in the snow halfway between his shelter and the area where he usually absorbed sunlight. His gaseous body was barely visible, like a dim candle in the wind. Energy. Depleted, he whispered in a voice like rustling leaves. Clouds too thick. Cannot feed. Jae-sung's species needed constant energy input to maintain their form. Without enough sunlight, he was literally fading away. Can you store energy like Mira stores nutrients? Tejo asked. No, Jae-sung said weakly. We consume energy as we need it. We never expected to go days without sufficient sunlight. Tejo thought quickly. What about other energy sources? Can you absorb heat instead of light? Heat. Yes, but it must be very intense. Like fire energy. Tejo looked at Instructor Veltar. Help me carry him to my shelter. It was difficult to carry a being made of gas and energy, but they managed to guide Jae-sung back to the warm building. Tejo built up his fire until it was blazing hot. Then he arranged mirrors and metal pieces to reflect the heat toward Jae-sung. The gaseous being began to glow brighter as he absorbed the concentrated heat energy. Better, he said, his voice growing stronger. This is working. Instructor Veltar was amazed. You are feeding both of them using only basic fire and shelter. Heat is heat, Tejo said. Energy is energy. It does not matter where it comes from if you know how to use it properly. Over the next few days, the storm grew worse. The temperature dropped to levels that challenged even the instructor's crystal body. Wind howled across the valley constantly. Snow fell so thick that visibility was nearly zero. Mira and Jae-sung stayed in Tejo's shelter. He shared his warmth and his knowledge with them. He showed Mira how to melt snow for the water her body needed. He taught Jae-sung how to position himself near the fire for maximum energy absorption. In return, they shared their own knowledge. Mira told him about her people's techniques for finding food in aquatic environments. Jae-sung explained how his species could sense weather patterns by reading energy flows in the atmosphere. I was wrong about you, Mira said one evening as they sat around the fire. I thought humans were weak because you have no special abilities. But you do have special abilities, Jae-sung added. You can adapt to any situation. You can learn from others. You can solve problems that would kill other species. Tejo smiled. My grandmother always said that flexibility is stronger than any armor. During a brief break in the storm, they checked on Da-eun's cave. The entrance was completely buried under snow and ice. There was no way to know if she was still alive inside. Should we dig her out? Mira asked. No, Instructor Veltar said. Her species' hibernation is very deep. Waking her early could kill her. We must trust that she prepared properly. But privately, the instructor was worried. The storm was much worse than predicted. Even Daun's people might not survive this level of cold. As they returned to Tai-Ho's shelter, the instructor realized something important was happening. The human was not just surviving the winter, he was helping others survive too. His techniques were saving lives that would have been lost. Your species may not have biological advantages, the instructor told Tai-Ho, but you have something else. You have knowledge accumulated over generations. You have the ability to adapt that knowledge to new situations. And you have compassion, Mira added. You could have let us die and had more resources for yourself. Instead, you shared what you had. Tai-Ho looked out at the storm raging across the valley. Winter is the enemy, he said. Not each other. When people work together, they can survive anything. The worst part of winter was still ahead, but for the first time since the test began, Instructor Veltar thought all his students might actually survive. The human had changed everything. The storm lasted for 3 weeks. When it finally ended, the valley was buried under 20 feet of snow. The temperature had dropped so low that even breathing hurt. The two suns were dim and distant, providing almost no heat. This was the deep winter that Instructor Veltar had warned them about. Tai-Ho looked out from his shelter and saw a world transformed into a frozen wasteland. Everything was white and silent. No birds flew overhead. No animals moved in the snow. Even the river was frozen solid under thick ice. It is beautiful, Mira said, standing beside him. Her skin had turned a deep blue color that meant she was cold but stable, but also terrifying. Jae-sung floated near the ceiling, glowing softly from the heat energy he had absorbed from the fire. My people have legends about worlds like this. We call them the hungry places because they devour all life. This is not the worst it will get, Instructor Veltar warned them. The true deep winter lasts for 3 more months. The temperature will drop even lower. The storms will return. Tai-Ho nodded grimly. He had expected this. His grandfather had told him stories about the terrible winter of 1951, when snow fell for months and people survived by eating tree bark. This alien winter would be even worse. We need to check the food supplies, Tai-Ho said. They climbed down into the cellar together. The underground storage room had performed perfectly during the storm. The temperature had remained steady. None of the preserved food had frozen or spoiled. Tai-Ho examined his carefully organized supplies. The smoked meat was aging well, becoming more concentrated and nutritious. The fermented vegetables had developed complex flavors that would provide important vitamins. The dried fruits and nuts were unchanged. How much is left? Instructor Veltar asked. Tai-Ho did quick calculations in his head. If we are careful with portions, we have enough for all 3 of us to survive the rest of winter. But we cannot waste anything. He had planned his supplies for 1 person, not 3. Feeding Mira and Jae-sung meant everyone would have to eat less. But Tai-Ho had learned from his grandfather that sharing food was the only way to ensure everyone survived. I can reduce my heat absorption, Jae-sung offered. I will need less energy if I move slowly and rest more. My stored nutrients will last longer if I stay very still, Mira added. I do not need to eat your food. I just need warmth and water. Tai-Ho appreciated their offers, but he knew they would all need proper nutrition to stay healthy through the long winter ahead. We share everything equally, he said firmly. That is how we all survive. Over the following days, Tai-Ho established a strict routine. Each morning he would venture out into the frozen world to collect firewood and check for any signs of available food. The work was exhausting in the extreme cold but necessary. He found that some hardy plants still grew under the snow. Their roots could be dug up and eaten. Ice fishing was possible if he could break through the thick frozen layer over the river. Sometimes he found small animals that had died in the storm, their meat preserved by the cold. Every calorie mattered now. Tai-Ho wasted nothing. He made soup from bones and vegetable scraps. He roasted nuts to make them more digestible. He carefully rationed the stored food to make it last as long as possible. Mira and Jae-sung helped however they could. Mira's aquatic senses could detect water flowing under ice, helping them find the best fishing spots. Jae-sung could sense heat signatures, locating animals hiding in the snow. But as the weeks passed, the situation grew more desperate. The cold was so intense that it penetrated even their improved shelter. Ice formed on the inside walls. The fire had to burn constantly, just to keep them from freezing to death. The fuel consumption is too high, Taeho admitted one evening as he fed precious wood to the fire. We are burning through our firewood faster than I expected. They had to make a difficult choice. Burn less wood and risk freezing, or burn more and risk running out of fuel before spring. Taeho decided to try a different approach. He began burning different materials in carefully controlled ways. Animal fat burned hot and long. Dried grass and paper could start fires quickly. Even some of the empty food containers could be burned for heat. More importantly, he redesigned their heating system. Using techniques his father had taught him, he built thermal mass heaters that stored heat from the fire and released it slowly over many hours. This made their fuel last much longer. Your species has remarkable problem-solving abilities, Instructor Veltar observed. You adapt your techniques constantly as conditions change. Humans have been surviving winters for millions of years, Taeho replied. We learned that the key is not to fight winter but to work with it. Midway through the deep winter, disaster struck. A massive ice storm hit the valley, coating everything in thick layers of ice. The weight of the ice broke tree branches and made collecting firewood nearly impossible. Worse, the ice blocked their shelter's chimney, filling the building with dangerous smoke. Taeho had to climb onto the roof in the middle of the storm to clear the chimney. The ice was so slippery that he nearly fell several times. The wind was so strong it almost blew him off the roof. But he managed to clear the blockage and get their heating system working again. You risked your life for us, Mira said when he finally climbed back inside, covered in ice and shaking from cold. We are a team now, Taeho said simply. Teams do not leave members behind. The ice storm had another serious consequence. The thick ice layer made it impossible to dig for edible roots or to fish through the river ice. Their food gathering was reduced to almost nothing just when they needed it most. Taeho had to dip deeper into their stored supplies. He carefully calculated portions, making sure everyone got enough nutrition to stay healthy, but not so much that they would run out of food before spring. We are eating like birds, Jae-sung joked weakly. His energy was very low now, his glow barely visible. Small portions many times per day, Taeho agreed. It helps the body use nutrition more efficiently. He had learned this technique from studying historical famines on HFY Earth. People could survive on much less food if they ate small amounts regularly rather than large meals occasionally. As the winter wore on, all three students grew thinner and weaker, but they were still alive, still healthy enough to think clearly and work together. Their shared body heat helped everyone stay warm. Their combined knowledge helped them solve problems that would have killed any of them alone. Meanwhile, they had heard nothing from Da-eun since the beginning of winter. Her cave remained sealed under tons of snow and ice. There was no way to reach her or to know if she was still alive. Her species can survive extremely long hibernation, Instructor Veltar said, but this winter has been worse than anyone predicted. Even her people have limits. Taeho worried about their missing classmate, but there was nothing they could do except hope her preparations had been adequate. 2 months into the deep winter, something wonderful happened. On a clear, cold morning, Jae-sung detected a change in the energy patterns around them. The atmospheric flows are shifting, he announced, his gaseous body brightening with excitement. The weather systems are changing. Instructor Veltar confirmed this with his own sensors. The deep winter is beginning to weaken. We are past the halfway point. For the first time in months, everyone smiled. They had survived the worst part. If they could maintain their discipline and continue working together, they would make it to spring. But Taeho knew they could not relax yet. The hardest part is often near the end, he warned. When people think they are safe, they make mistakes. He had learned this from studying mountain climbing disasters. Many people died not during the ascent, but during the descent when they thought the danger was over. They would have to remain careful and disciplined for several more weeks. The winter was not finished with them yet. But for the first time since the test began, Taeho felt confident that all of them would survive to see spring. The human techniques were working. Knowledge passed down through generations was proving stronger than any biological adaptation, and the bonds forged between the students during the long, dark winter would last for the rest of their lives. Spring came slowly to the valley. At first, it was just small signs that Taeho noticed during his daily trips outside. The wind felt slightly warmer. The daylight lasted a few minutes longer. The ice on the river made different sounds when he walked across it. The winter is breaking, he told Mira and Jae-sung one morning as he returned from collecting firewood. I can smell it in the air. Mira's skin turned bright yellow with hope. She had grown very thin during the long winter, but her species' stored nutrients had kept her alive. How much longer? She asked. Maybe 2 weeks until real warmth returns, Taeho estimated. But we must stay careful. Late winter storms can be the most dangerous. Jae-sung floated higher toward the ceiling, his glow slightly brighter than it had been in months. I can sense more solar energy reaching the planet. The atmospheric interference is decreasing. Instructor Veltar visited them more often now, checking on their condition and documenting their survival techniques. He had been amazed by their cooperation throughout the winter. In all my years teaching survival, the instructor said, I have never seen students work together like this. Usually, extreme conditions make people selfish and hostile. Humans learned long ago that cooperation is better than competition during hard times, Taeho explained. My people have a saying, a single stick breaks easily, but a bundle of sticks is strong. The instructor's crystal body flashed blue with understanding. Your species compensates for physical weaknesses with social strengths. As the days grew warmer, they began to see signs of life returning to the valley. Small birds appeared flying north from warmer regions. Insects buzzed in the afternoon sun. Green shoots pushed up through the melting snow. Most importantly, they heard sounds from Daeun's cave. The thick ice that had sealed the entrance was beginning to crack and melt. Through the gaps, they could hear movement inside. Daeun was starting to wake up from her long hibernation. We should help her get out, Mira suggested. No, Instructor Veltar warned. Her species' awakening process is very delicate. Disturbing it could be dangerous. We must wait for her to emerge naturally. They waited anxiously for 3 days. Finally, the ice barrier broke apart completely and Daeun stumbled out into the sunlight. She looked exactly the same as when she had entered hibernation months ago. Her rock-like body showed no signs of the hardships the others had endured. Is winter over? She asked in her slow, grinding voice. Almost, Taeho said, smiling with relief. You made it through perfectly. Daeun looked around the valley, taking in the changes. The landscape was still mostly white with snow, but patches of brown earth were showing through. The river was running freely in places where the ice had melted. You all look different, she observed. Thinner, older, it was true. The long winter had changed them all. Mira had learned to conserve energy and resources in ways her people had never needed before. Jae-sung had discovered how to survive on minimal energy input for extended periods, and Taeho had proven that human adaptability could overcome any biological disadvantage. We learned many things, Mira said. The human taught us how to survive when our natural abilities were not enough. Daeun's stone face showed surprise. The human? I thought humans were too weak for this test. So did I, Jae-sung admitted. But Taeho saved our lives. His techniques kept us warm and fed when we would have died otherwise. Daeun looked at Taeho with new respect. I apologize for underestimating your species. No need to apologize, Taeho said. Everyone learns from experience. Over the next week, spring arrived in full force. The snow melted rapidly, creating streams and waterfalls throughout the valley. Green plants sprouted everywhere. Animals emerged from their winter hiding places. The two suns felt warm on their faces for the first time in months. The students began the process of ending their survival test. They inventoried their remaining supplies, documented their techniques, and prepared reports for the academy. Taeho's cellar still contained a surprising amount of food. His careful rationing and preservation methods had made the supplies last through the entire winter with some despair. Remarkable, Instructor Veltar said as he examined the underground storage room. You calculated your needs almost perfectly, even though you ended up feeding 3 people instead of 1. My grandfather always said to prepare for twice as many people as you expect, Taeho explained. He learned that during wartime. The instructor documented everything carefully. Taeho's techniques would be studied and taught to future students. His simple cellar had revolutionized thinking about survival on harsh worlds. Representatives from the Galactic Academy arrived to evaluate the test results. They interviewed each student and examined their survival methods. Your students have achieved something extraordinary, the lead evaluator told Instructor Veltar. A 100% survival rate in conditions that usually kill at least half the participants. The evaluator was particularly interested in Taeho's contributions. These human preservation techniques are unlike anything we have seen before. They use no advanced technology. yet they are more effective than methods used by species with biological advantages. The human approach is based on accumulated knowledge rather than instinct, Instructor Veltar explained. They learn from their ancestors' experiences and adapt techniques to new situations. Fascinating. We would like to establish an exchange program. Human survival specialists could teach our students, while our students could learn about galactic environments. Word of their successful winter survival spread quickly through the academy. Students from other classes came to visit Taiho's cellar and learn about his techniques. Instructors asked him to demonstrate food preservation methods. You have become famous, Mira teased. The weak human who showed everyone how to survive. Not weak, Jae-sung corrected. Different. Humans are not weak. They are specialized for adaptation. Da-yoon, who had missed most of the winter experience, was eager to learn what had happened. The others told her stories about the terrible storms, the extreme cold, and how they had worked together to survive. Your species has a valuable trait, she told Taeho. You can make others stronger instead of just protecting yourself. As their time at the academy came to an end, the 4 students had become close friends. They had shared life-threatening experiences and learned to depend on each other. I will miss this place, Mira said as they packed their belongings. I will miss working together, Jae-sung added. My people usually live alone. I never knew cooperation could be so powerful. You are always welcome on my homeworld, Da-yoon offered. My people would like to learn human preservation techniques for our own settlements. Instructor Veltar approached them on their final day. His crystal body flashed with colors they had never seen before, a complex pattern that meant deep respect and admiration. You have taught me something important, he said to Taeho. I judged your species by what you lack instead of what you possess. That was a mistake I will not make again. Every species has strengths, Taeho replied. The key is learning how to use them together. 6 months later, Taeho received a message from the Galactic Council. They wanted him to help establish survival training programs on 12 different worlds. His techniques were being adapted for use by dozens of species. His simple cellar had become the foundation for a new approach to survival training throughout the galaxy. Instead of relying only on biological advantages, students would learn human techniques for adaptation, cooperation, and resource management. Mira had returned to her aquatic homeworld, where she taught her people about thermal regulation and energy conservation. Jae-sung was working with atmospheric engineers to design better heating systems for space colonies. Da-yoon had become an advocate for cross-species cooperation in her traditionally isolationist society. But the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. No longer were humans seen as weak organics without useful abilities. They were recognized as master survivors whose knowledge could benefit everyone. Taeho often thought about his grandfather's stories and his grandmother's preservation techniques. Those old methods, passed down through generations of Korean families, had become the basis for galactic survival. Science. Sometimes the oldest ways are the best ways, he had told his sister in a video call after returning to Earth. We just have to remember to use them. The winter test had proven that strength came in many forms. Physical power and biological advantages were useful, but knowledge, adaptability, and cooperation were even more valuable. And sometimes, the species that looked weakest on the surface could turn out to be the strongest of all.